Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Here we are again every Thursday at 9 a.m. For NFA Live. We have Guy from Coin Bureau. How you doing, Guy?
I'm good, thanks, Ben. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And we have a special guest with us, Nick, also from Coin Bureau.
Hey,
How you doing, Nick?
hey, Ben. Great to be here with you guys. Welcome to be a guest here.
Yeah, good to have you. I think we've had you on maybe once before, or you were on NFA Live once before, but I don't remember what channel it was on. I think it might have been.
I was on yours once before, I think, and then I was on Rob's at one point as well with Jess, I recall.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So people will at least recognize a familiar face. We got a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes in the cryptoverse in a relatively short period of time. We have Bitcoin dropping below 90K, along a few other things. But, the first thing, Guy, and I'll start with you, Guy, first on this, is that the meme coin stuff has been, sort of the talk of the cryptoverse recently. And, I've seen some interesting stats on that. Is that craze dying out yet? Or is it going to come surging back just when we least expect it? I mean, I think a lot of people are pretty exhausted by all the the tens of thousands of meme coins that have been launching like every day for months. But I am curious, like, is the trend dying out, or what do we have to expect here?
Well, yes. I mean, I'll start by saying I really hope it is, because I think I think everyone's had enough, and I think it's been really, really bad for the overall image of crypto, which is one of the things that I really just can't shake at the moment. This nagging feeling that crypto's image is so bad, and it's really holding us back. And everything around sort of meme coins of late, culminating, if you like, with this Malay thing just recently, has just been such a bad look for the space, and I think it's turning people off, turning newcomers off from it. So yeah, I hope it's coming to an end, and I think we've probably been looking at the similar stats. I think I was seeing something around pump.fun revenues are falling through the floor at the moment. I'll try and find, maybe when you talk to Nick, I'll try and find the tweet I was thinking about there. But it certainly seems like it's trending almost towards zero in terms of the number of coins being launched on pump.fun now, which obviously is impacting its revenues. And look, I think pump.fun was an interesting project. Sure, it certainly got everyone talking, but I think it's been a net bad for the space, because it's one of those things, like it got too much. It got carried away. That said, I'll caveat and say that I think there'll always be people wanting to gamble. Gambling is a thing, and it seems to be getting bigger and bigger. More and more people seem to be gambling, and as long as that gambling element exists, I think there will always be people who are willing to go into the meme coin casino. So I don't think they can ever really die. I think they're sort of entering a sort of zombified phase, and yeah, I think that's a good thing. We need to move on past that. It hasn't been good for us at all.
Yeah, by the way, I see a lot of people asking where Rob is. He's just out this week. We haven't cast him aside.
Coin Bureau have launched a coup.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll be back in future weeks. Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, there's always probably going to be something in that part of the cryptoverse. It's just it became sort of the main talk for the last year or so. By a lot of people. Nick, do you generally agree? Are they sort of trending away, but they might still
so I think definitely pump.fun precipitated a lot of what we've seen with the dilution and just the massive onslaught of meme coins, this whole meme coin industrial complex, and the massive extraction we've seen. And I come back to Guy's point, yes, it's true that people will always want to gamble, and on-chain gambling is a thing. But when you realize how badly the odds are stacked against you, you probably want to go and play a different game. Initially, meme coins were created as a way for kind of like this concept of a fair launch against the VC coins, where people could go and participate, and they'd get a fair shot at crack at the whip. from an early launch and that kind of stuff, which was egalitarian when it started. But what we've seen more recently is just how the odds are stacked against the average retail participant, from the people who developing the coins, to the insiders, to the snipers, to the actual platforms these are launched on. And I think it was Lincoln who said, you can fool some of the people all of the time, all of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. And eventually all these people who are playing around with the meme coins, they're going to start realizing, wait a second, I've lost money here. The stats are there. Most people have lost money, and they're going to not be interested anymore. And then they're just going to go and find something else to do. So I think there'll always be people who want to try and gamble. There's still people who go to the casino. There's still people who play the lotto, despite the odds there. But the large amount of people who in the crypto natives who've been playing the meme coin game are kind of like now getting a bit sick and tired of it. And I think the massive blowback that we've seen in terms of sentiment towards meme coins, and more specifically to Pump.Fun, I think it's a good thing.
I was thinking about this because I've been very critical of meme coins for a while, and I was like, maybe my thoughts aren't working to get people out of it, because it'd be sort of akin to standing outside of a casino and telling people not to go in. Like if they're already there, they're probably going to want to go in, even if I'm trying to tell them not to. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you guys are right. It's just a casino, and I think a lot of people know what they're getting themselves into, frankly, at this point. But I one of the things I wanted to mention is that essentially, since the new administration, Bitcoin hasn't really been doing that well. And, that's not necessarily a reflection of the new administration. You could argue that a lot of, sort of the gains after the election results were on the back of that news. But, there's a lot of promise of like a golden age of crypto. And I feel like I've read that more than a few times since January 20th. And, I can't help but notice that it hasn't exactly been that so far. So I'm curious, do you think it's possible for us to get back to that idea? Is this something that we can achieve at some point, during this presidency, or is something else going on, right? Is something else going on that people are missing? Nick, we'll start with you on this.
Yeah, so I think that expectations ran hot very quickly running into it, right? I mean, for one, there was the whole thought about the Bitcoin strategic reserve, right? Which would obviously be a massive thing for Bitcoin, a nation state accumulating Bitcoin. And after Trump was elected, it seemed as if that got quite watered down in terms of potentially, it's not going to be the strategic reserve that had been thought of by Cynthia Lummis, which was the accumulation of Bitcoin. It will just be holding what they have. Then it was, okay, well, it's not going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve. It will be a digital asset stockpile. And then it was most recently with, David Sachs, it's going to be assess the feasibility of it, which in government terms, if you assess the feasibility of something, that basically means putting it aside. So I think that the markets ran very hot on this notion. And then there was also all the Crypto Council, I believe, is no longer. They're going to look at some rotating panel of experts. So it seems a lot of the pro-crypto stuff that was coming has been either delayed out or watered down. Obviously, there's the positive impacts, which we will have from positive regulatory environment. If there is a lot of lawsuits are being dropped by the SEC, we've got pro-crypto regulators going in there. There is legislation coming, like the Genius Act, which I think is on the stablecoin side. But these will take some time to be borne out. They'll take some time to be felt. And as a result, the market's basically now assessing, well, it's going to take some time for this to come, and the bidding isn't there, and the people aren't accumulating yet. And then at the same time, on the side, yes, it's great. He's been pro-crypto. They said he's going to be pro-crypto, but we didn't encounter and think about the macro impacts of trade wars, massive cuts, job cuts in the US federal government, potential inflation coming back. And this is now leading to massive macro concerns, which are tanking the rest of the markets, including risk assets, which Bitcoin is increasingly become one of. So I think that's the reason. Now, the golden age of crypto, I think that obviously these positive crypto regulations will come, and they will take some time to be actually rolled out, and then builders can come back to the US and and then projects, especially on the altcoin side, can build freely. But until we have some sort of clear macro backdrop, which right now is very volatile and uncertain, it's difficult to see how assets like crypto and especially like risk assets are going to rally.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of uncertainty associated with new administrations, just because the market doesn't really know what's going to happen. And honestly, I'm having a hard time keeping up with all the headlines these days. Seems like just about every day there's like some other major thing being planned. But Guy, what are your thoughts? Not exactly the golden age. Is that something achievable later on in the presidency? I mean, if you look at, I mean, like, for instance, like, just to give you guys an example, like when Reagan took office in 1981, markets trended down for a while they got inflation under control, and then it set up, a decade or two of economic expansion. So sometimes you could argue that, pain in the market can help get out the froth, right? Like the meme coins, to allow the better stuff to ultimately thrive. So, Guy, I'm curious, like, do you think that it's possible that, at some point during this presidency, that crypto can get back on track, and maybe we'll get that golden age?
Maybe we can, as we were discussing off air, maybe we can then think about renaming NFA as just golden age. Yeah, I think we can get there. I mean, so far Trump has been kind of predictably unpredictable, hasn't he? As you kind of mentioned, Ben, it's hard to keep up with everything that's happening, and that does seem like a deliberate strategy. I mean, I think that's, if I remember rightly, I think it's someone like Steve Bannon or something, someone of that ilk, saying, it's kind of flooding the zone. You just do so much, you just introduce so much that people just can't keep up, and that seems to be what's happening at the moment. Now, whether Trump and his administration keep that up, if this is what the next 4 years are going to look like, it's going to be exhausting. So I kind of feel that maybe after a while, things will settle down a bit, and some sort of certainty can come back. Obviously, I think a lot of the uncertainty at the moment is around these tariffs, and I think it's a kind of similar thing that we find often with token unlocks in crypto. It's sort of a lot of the panic tends to be because of the actual things themselves, the announcements around them. Once they actually come into place, okay, they could very well end up being inflationary, which presents a whole, which revivifies that kind of specter, doesn't it? But we could get to a point where sort of the initial Trump wave, if you like, kind of breaks, and maybe we get back into a bit of calm, and that is when I think we could see legislation come through. And I think at the moment it just seems like crypto has kind of dropped off the agenda a little bit. We were so excited about those executive orders, weren't we? And we so excited to see what David Sachs was going to come out with, and that's been sort of done. And now Trump and everyone else are kind of, they're very much focused on Ukraine and things like that, leaving aside all this sort of stuff about, all the mad stuff about Greenland and whatever else is next. So it does kind of feel that the attention of the administration has shifted away from crypto. So perhaps it'll shift back. I think at some point, the needle will swing back towards crypto, and we could end up with the legislation that we're hoping for. It's also kind of got me, your question sort of got me thinking a little bit about what a golden age even looks like for crypto. Do you know what I mean? Is it just everyone's bags pumping and, hooray, Bitcoin, 150, 200K, whatever, alts flying? Is that what a golden age is? Or is it more
XRP and ADA strategic reserves? XRP and ADA strategic reserves. That's the golden age of crypto.
That's one day. Or is it crypto being used? Is it cool stuff coming out and suddenly and people who are outside of crypto going, oh, hang on a sec, like this is cool. This is a cool thing. People using it. Like, can it be both? I don't know. But it'd be interesting to see what David Sachs and Donald Trump and everyone else's actual vision of a golden age for crypto is.
You could argue that to get to an actual golden age, you have to go through some pain so the meme coin stuff can die. You could argue that, right? I mean, so that we get away from some of the the malinvestment in the cryptoverse. So sometimes to have good times, you have to have bad times.
To the meme coin point, sorry to interrupt, Ben, but I think it's also something I think we should have touched on there is the fact that I think that also, and then this relates to it, we need to have consequences for people on the meme coin front, right? Because otherwise you want to dissuade bad actors from using the crypto industry and, you know, doing bad things on chain. And, you know, right now the question is a pro crypto SEC going to, you know, on the one hand, obviously the pro crypto regulation, but are they going to also enforce criminality in terms of like, is it really a crime season? Is this now being, you know, sanctioned and like people within the ACC, and are they going to go to the full lengths of the law to pursue the people who were involved? And I wonder, because if you go up the chain in terms of, especially as it relates to the Melania and the Trump coin, you know, who's up the chain there, right?
Yeah. I think that like I think in my mind, you could argue that going through the phase where a lot of the stuff like the meme stuff is dying, you think you could argue that that's honestly like not a bad thing. I mean, it sucks that people are losing money on it, but I think it's ultimately good for crypto. I just think that the new administration might lose the plot a little bit because they launched their own meme coins. So it's not like, you know, we can forget about that, but at the same time, you know, maybe the end result is what the cryptoverse ultimately needed, and that was, you know, some of this resolution with what are we actually going to focus on as an industry. So speaking of altcoin ETFs, I'm curious, are they actually going to come through this year? You know, I mean, this was definitely the year of the Bitcoin ETF, and it ended up, you know, the ETH ETF even made some headlines. But to be honest, I mean, with the ETH ETF, it just led to a 1 week pump, and that, you know, that was about it. It didn't really change the trend on Ethereum. So I'm curious, do you think the altcoin ETFs will come through this year? And if they do you think they'll have a significant impact on the market? And if they don't come through this year, is it something that might just be later on in the presidency, like, you know, maybe like 2028 or something? Yeah, Nick.
No, so I definitely think they'll come through. There's odds on both Polymarket and the Bloomberg analysts themselves. Like, they think there's a 90% chance for Litecoin one, a 75% chance for Dogecoin one, 70% for Solana. So it's very likely, and I think that the SEC is moving these applications ahead very quickly. They're engaging in conversations, and it seems like the issuers are going through all the right steps, and it's going through the motions now in terms of listings. And I saw recently the Solana one got on the DTCC website as well, and Aptos filed one as well. So they are definitely coming, and they will come in I think probably within the next 6 months you'll get listings. Now the question as to whether they're going to actually have any inflows is a different story, because as you rightly alluded to, the Ethereum one, when ETH was the premier altcoin last year, and it was the only option, and it was just, you know, no one, you know, there was firstly massive outflows, and then it didn't really pick up a lot, maybe a little bit at the beginning of this year, but not that much. And I think this plays to two things. I think one is obviously narrative, and the investment narrative. So Bitcoin, as we say, it's easy. Bitcoin is digital gold. You hold it in your portfolio. All these large asset managers and people who've wanted to invest in Bitcoin in some sort of a regulated wrapper now can. But then moving down to Ethereum, it was difficult because they didn't know what is Ethereum really. Is it like digital oil? Is it like a smart contract platform where you can have immutable smart contracts? It's not as simple to understand for most people in the retail and institutional side as Bitcoin is. So are these other altcoins going to have a narrative that's going to resonate with them and that they're going to feel, you know, they want to invest in? So that's the one point. And I think that a lot of these, I don't think so, unfortunately. I mean, I don't want to take any shots at any particular cryptocurrencies, but like Polkadot, for instance, like, why would a large institutional investor want to go and, first of all, if they could invest in Polkadot, they can go and create an account anywhere the stuff trades on OTC. They can go and buy it through any other means. Just because there's an ETF, does that mean they're now going to want to buy it and bid it? That's the first thing. And then I think it's just also liquidity and general flows, right? Like, you know, it's just because you've got an ETF, it facilitates easy investment, but I think the narrative and the liquidity has to come as well. So my feeling is that they're not going to have they'll have a momentary pump, maybe a buy the news and then sell the event, but they're going to struggle with inflows unless we have the right narrative, unless the right risk conditions are there, macro conditions, and unless the liquidity is flowing.
Fair enough. Yeah, it seems like you have. I mean, Ethereum taught the industry a lot of lessons with ETFs. I was actually kind of hoping this would just be the cycle for the Bitcoin ETFs, and the next cycle we could focus on on the other ETFs, but it looks like it's going to be the whole ETF cycle, which is kind of like it kind of fits with the cycle, right? The whole cycle has been how do we get crypto in front of more people? That's kind of what this whole cycle has been. Was kind of what's been about. Someone says there are too many SHT coins diluting crypto. I'm not really sure what SHT is, but that's an interesting comment.
I think there's a typo. There's missing something point.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're missing. Guy, what do you think about the ETFs? I mean, Bitcoin had some pretty good flows for a while. I think there have been some outflows recently, but there were also some outflows at various points last year too. So it's not like we haven't seen that before. But yeah, what are your thoughts about altcoin ETFs for this cycle?
Yeah. Well, I think, I agree with Nick. I think they will come. I think they will probably come this year. And they seem now to be, I think, in the absence of anything else, they seem to be the kind of latest North Star, if you will. Like there was the excitement around the inauguration. There was excitement around, various, what the policies were going to be regarding crypto. Now that's all kind of a strategic reserve as well. There was the excitement around that. That's all fizzled out. So what have we got to look? What have we got to look for? And yeah, altcoin ETFs seem to be probably the only real thing on the horizon. So I think in terms of the impact they'll have on the market, I think they will move the market, but only if they do well. And I think the problem is that market confidence is so low at the moment that if they're a damp squib, if they really fail to go off and they don't get the inflows, then I think that could knock us lower again. Do you know what I mean? I think, that there will be a kind of mini capitulation of hope, and that will set us back, however many weeks and months and stuff. So that I'm kind of wary, or, a little hesitant to sort of cheer for them, because I think maybe you're right, Ben. Like maybe this should have just been the Bitcoin ETF cycle. I hadn't really thought of it in those sort of terms before, but I think there's a good point to that. Like, maybe we just moved too fast, and maybe we're still sort of moving too fast. And really, the wider market is not really ready for these, because it didn't, as Nick pointed out, it didn't really seem all that ready for a spot Ethereum ETFs. I think the interesting one to watch will be the Litecoin one, which seems to have the greatest chance of being approved first, because I think that'll be interesting, because Litecoin does have a fairly strong narrative. Bitcoin is digital gold, Litecoin is digital silver. As Nick said, like the narrative around Ethereum is much harder to pin down. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, firstly, if a Litecoin ETF is approved and issued, and how many are issued, and secondly, how well they do, because there is a chance that institutional investors or investors outside of non-crypto native investors go, okay, digital silver, I think that seems like a good hedge to have in my portfolio. So that will be, I think, really interesting to see. But when you get to the others, I think they're sort of straying more into that Ethereum territory of being a bit of a harder sell, like XRP, HBAR, Doge. I mean, part of me thinks that could be a really hard sell. It's like, it's a meme coin ETF, and just, are people going to be interested? I don't know. Same with Solana. Like, is Ethereum but cheaper and faster? Is that enough of a narrative when Ethereum itself hasn't really been enough of a narrative? So
there's a Trump
I think a lot
there's a Trump ETF as well, Guy. Don't forget the Trump ETF. The Trump token. That's going to struggle for narrative. Right?
It's just so tiring.
I saw someone say that we've reached the point in the cycle where when people ask like what they do, they just say they're in fintech. Not crypto.
I just say I'm an educator. I like to educate people about fintech. A fintech media company.
Fintech bureau.
Oh man, that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah. No, it's like we kind of go through this every few years, you know, where the industry has everything going for it, and then we kind of lose our way, and then it's like, you know, like, oh, don't look at the industry right now, like let it just go through these growing pains as quickly as possible. Um, yeah, I was looking at. I noticed that Litecoin had been showing some relative strength against Bitcoin recently, and it was kind of funny because anytime Litecoin is doing well, like the market's usually dumping for some reason. Like I don't know if you guys ever noticed that, but usually when Litecoin starts going up, the rest of the market. This has kind of been a meme for Litecoin, basically back, you know, going back years. I mean, I remember that meme even being back in 2017, 2018. You're like, oh, Litecoin's going up. That means the whole market's going to dump. Um, and I was actually looking at it, and with the recent strength by Litecoin, it's now only down 97% against Bitcoin over the last 12 years. So it's got
Only
that going.
97%.
Only 97%.
Bullish.
I mean, you can make a bullish argument for Litecoin, I suppose, from the perspective of it's well supported. It's on a lot of different exchanges. It's been around for a long time. In terms of sustainability for mining, it's merge mined with Doge, so it's long-term sustainability is there. I mean, so you can make a bullish argument for it. But the digital silver one is interesting. I think because that's what it's been positioned as. But in terms of a payment currency, it was always thought of that, and it is a lot faster because the algorithm and all that. But now I think stablecoins are going to dominate that narrative. You know, it's much better to make a payment with a stable currency than a volatile one in terms of price.
Yeah. And normally it's not that unusual for the Litecoin Bitcoin pair to see some rally in the post-halving year. Like it did it in 2013, in 2017, and in 2021. So it's not like it's that unheard of for that to happen. I'm curious, let's if we could shift over to the macro side. Nick, I'll start with you on this one. I'm curious if you think we're going to see any major changes in monetary policy this year. It could be, you know, with the Fed. It could be with, you know, other central banks. And if you do think we're going to see changes, how could that affect the markets? I mean, how do you think it could affect crypto?
Yeah, the macro picture is looking very interesting because there's so many different forces. Okay, so one monetary policy is one on the Fed side. Obviously, it seems like the most likely cut is going to be based in June. Now it's been pushed to June. Some banks are saying there's not going to be any cuts. Some saying we could have one. Some Fed governors being dovish, others being hawkish. Inflation is picking up a little bit. It's still a bit hot. Especially with the CPI print last like 2 weeks ago, and you know everyone's focused on the PCE tomorrow, so that's going to drive monetary policy on the short end with Fed rates. But I think the most interesting thing that's happened in the macro space right now, and I'm curious to get your take on this as well, Ben, is what's happening with regards to the Treasury, Besant's 333 plan, and what they're trying to do to tame and bring down the 10-year rates and long end yields. Because it seems it's been stated that this is Trump's main goal from a macro perspective. And now there's many different forces there. It's not just, you know, central banks. It's also the treasuries themselves. It's the buyers of these bonds. It's regulations within the banks and their reserve ratios and commercial banks if they were to buy treasuries. And this is, I think, one of the factors, because obviously if we are having, and this ties into also the fiscal side of it, if you do have like a reduction in deficit spending with what Doge is doing, right? The Department of Government Efficiency, you know, reduction in deficit spending is generally not bullish for macro. I mean, generally not bullish for risk assets, right? Because there's less deficit spending. So contraction wise. So, you know, that it is, but then of course, you've got the inflation aspect that potentially leads to, you know, dampened growth, more inflation. The tariff stuff, you have tariffs, that's less growth, more inflation. And this is also into the mix. So right now, I think it's very difficult to try and get a picture of what's happening on the macro side and all these forces put into it. You know, so, but in terms of the goals and objectives of what Trump and Besant have been doing, the 10-year has fallen a lot since Trump took office, over 50 basis points. But yeah, the picture is difficult right now on the macro side.
Yeah, I think the 10-year and the dollar also rallied in Q4 2016, kind of as he, you know, after he won the election, and then they both fell a lot after he took office. I think honestly, because you asked, I mean, I think Trump is largely going to measure his success based on if he can get interest rates down. I think that's actually more important to him right now than the stock market. because he comes from like real estate, and the real estate industry has been relatively difficult for the last few years because the rates are so high and prices are high. I think he's trying to get rates back down, and I think that's his focus. And we've been in an environment where the only way you can get rates to come back down is for the markets to do exactly what they're doing right now. For there to be some pain. If you have some pain, then rates can come down. If you don't have pain, then rates are probably going to keep going up. And I think he probably knows that. So I also think that he probably doesn't want another wave of inflation to kind of be his legacy. And if there's another wave in like 2026 or something, he can't like blame the prior administration for that. So one way to maybe get ahead of that is to cause markets to de-risk early on in the presidency, thus allowing inflation again. Something very similar happened with Reagan when he took office. They got inflation under control, and then there was good times later on. So it could just be like that. Guy, what are your thoughts about monetary policy? And also, do you think could we see the end of quantitative tightening this year with the Fed? I think the Bank of Canada is ending QT. I think in March potentially, but we still haven't heard anything from the Fed as to what they're going to do, other than just sort of speculation in the FOMC minutes. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts with monetary policy this year and how it might affect crypto?
Well, yeah, the those Fed minutes, they did talk about QE coming to an or tapering off QT. I think it was, wasn't it? So that's the kind of first hurdle, I guess, that we need to cross before we can expect anything else. My question around rates in particular, we're at the moment, because last year it was looking like it was forecast that we were going to get 3 rate cuts this year, and now I think there's talk of 2 perhaps. And I find myself thinking, it's like, well, okay, rates are still like really high, but not really high, but like much, much higher than they have been, for most of the last sort of 10, 20 years. So what difference, unless they do 2 really drastic cuts, which I'm not sure I can really see happening, what difference is 2 rate cuts really going to make to most people? Most people who are struggling with mortgage debts, car debts, medical debts, all this sort of stuff. Are 2 rate cuts really going to change anyone's situation all that much? Unless, like I say, unless they're pretty drastic cuts, I don't think so. So, QT seems to be an end to QT is sort of one waypoint that we need to get to. Rate cuts, I think, would be good, but I kind of agree with what you say, Ben. I think maybe Trump will have his eyes on the midterms, and maybe there is an element of pragmatism to it, and it's like, just get the pain over with now, so as you can go into the midterms, go into the next election in 28 or whenever it is, on a real high, and that, I think there's something to be said for that.
Something I'll just add there as well, coming back to the goal of Trump and the tenure, like many market analysts are saying, look, Trump, he's not too focused on the stock market this time around. And also he's been a bit more lenient on Jerome in terms of the short end rates, because what drives most people's debt in terms of interest rate burden is longer term rates. The average duration of debt in the US economy is about 7 years, right? Mortgage debt is like 30 years out. So obviously the long end rates, the more he's able to get that down, which is what he's doing, and Besant as a market operator who knows how the bond markets work, and they meet in those ends. Whereas just dropping short end rates, even if the Fed does drop twice and you still have long end rates high, it's still going to not have an impact with the average consumer in the US. So I think that's what they're trying to focus on. That's why he's going and targeting this particular long end rates in the 10-year.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I don't think he wants rates high at all. And but I also think he knows that Powell lowering rates isn't going to necessarily change the yield curve, the long end of the yield curve. So it's not just simple as lowering interest rates. There's got to be something that allows that long end to actually come down. And I also think there's some truth to be said that a lot of the pain in the short term, like if it happens early on in the presidency, I'm sure he'll just blame the prior administration, right? I'm not saying there's like no truth to that. I mean, you have had sort of a slowly rising unemployment rate. We have seen inflation trending up since September, when the Fed began cutting rates. But why not get it out of the way now rather than wait and deal with it later? Last question, and then we're going to get to some audience questions. So if you're in the audience and you have a question, make sure you put it in the chat. Last question. If you could go back in time and stop one major bad event in crypto from happening, which one would you prevent and why? Guy?
Wow. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about this
Long
one.
time.
Ben, you're really good at, well, I mean, you get great questions anyway, but you're really good at the final kicker question. The one, the one that really matters.
This is the one that took the most time to think about, Guy. This is the one that took the most time. Pontificating, literally, like.
Yeah, monetary policy. Yeah, they'll probably cut rates at some point. Who cares? Yeah, gosh. So I think, well, I guess the obvious answer, I'm going to go with the obvious answer. The obvious answer would be FTX, because it kind of ties in with what I was saying earlier, crypto's image problem and stuff. Like, I think coming out of the last bull market, crypto's image wasn't great. You had things like Luna, Celsius, etc., which were really, really bad, did a lot of damage. But really, in terms of like just ruining crypto's reputation, FTX was it, I think. And I think like we have kind of, we have made good progress away from that. But I think reputationally, I think crypto hasn't recovered from FTX, and I think it could take a while to recover from FTX. And like, I mean, someone made a really good point that like, perhaps it's best that FTX happened when it did, because if it had got bigger, if they poured even more money into the black hole, it could have been even worse. So, is it that sort of thing? You be wary of going back in time and stopping something, because actually what you could end up with could be even worse than what it was. But yeah, I think, and I guess the thing with FTX is it's kind of a handy one as well, because there's someone to blame. There's someone to blame. Sam Bankman-Fried. It was kind of the perfect scandal in a way. Not only did it sort of tank the market and wipe everyone out, but there was one clear culprit. Okay, there were other people involved, but SBF was the mastermind, and for that reason, that was kind of good in a way, because I hoped that, like, what with him going to jail and that culpability, and now, like, look, people are finally getting the FTX estate is making repayments, so some of the damage is being undone to an extent. But yeah, like, I think the stain of FTX will hang over the industry for years to come, and some people I don't think will ever forget it in a way, and it shouldn't be forgotten. So yeah, and I did think about like whether there were sort of earlier scandals, whether like Mt. Gox, it would have been good to be able to go back in time and prevent Mt. Gox and stuff. My feeling with a lot of these things is, and even to an extent FTX, is that they're learning experiences for the industry, and things have to break. You have to shine light in upon all the rubbish, don't you? You have to kind of cleanse by fire. And these things, these things are painful, but perhaps they're necessary. Yeah, like I say, I think I would go for the obvious one on this.
Did you see that he tweeted recently?
Some HR advice. He was giving some HR advice. Guy, he got some great HR advice when it comes to laying off people. None of which actually included don't do fraud that you have to fire your entire company.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was just as the market had taken another step lower, because I think that was when Trump sort of said, "Yeah, you remember those tariffs that you all forgot about? Yeah, they're still happening." And then market goes down, and then sure enough, SBF pops up. It's like, "Hi, I have some things to say."
I saw someone respond to one of his tweets or whatever, and they're like, "You're not going home, ETH is."
Oh man, we live in a simulation. Jeez,
I
Yeah,
hope he saw that. I really hope he
was
saw that.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe he was tweeting. I was like, what a time to be tweeting to. He's probably trying to remind people who rugged the industry to begin with, who started it all. Um, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
That was a crazy time. And by the way, I saw someone. Rebecca says, "Can we just pick theme songs again?" I missed it times. We'll have to pick a theme
So
song.
we'll get back to theme songs another week, Rebecca. Don't worry.
God.
Nick, what do you think? I mean, I know Guy listed off a few of the big meltdowns, but if you could go back
Yeah, I
and change
mean,
one thing, which one would you prevent?
I'm gonna take a bit of a in discussion of all these meme coins and pump.fun. I'm gonna say pump.fun before pump.fun launched. If pump.fun didn't launch, it'd be a lot happier as an industry. Sol would have continued its rally. We wouldn't have seen the raw criminality be born out of this. We wouldn't have had this massive dilution. We wouldn't have had this financial nihilism. We wouldn't have had the desecration of cube meme coins into this mass extraction event. And we wouldn't have had a Trump meme launch, right? Which has been, massively damaging to the markets right now in terms of liquidity and stuff. So I mean, it was a tough decision for me between FTX and that, but in present memory, I think those, and also in the case of FTX, although it was a really good example, I think it was one person you could blame. Whereas right now, it's like the problem is pump.fun kind of like showed, all the other people in the meme coin space raising their head and how like it really brought the worst in the industry out when it came to just people focused on mass extraction and complete bastardization of what crypto is about, right? So yeah, I think that'd be my answer.
I think a lot of people thought meme coins were saving Solana, but you could argue that was the very thing causing Sol Bitcoin to stall out. Was the
I remember you put out a chart or a tweet or something. I think was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Was like the Sol BTC chart was going up, and then there was something that happened here in March last year, and it's like flat.
It was January. Yeah, I think it was January of 2024, and that was where it stalled out. And I mean, you could argue that if you look at the Sol Bitcoin market cap ratio, it stalled out at the range high, just like the ETH Bitcoin market cap ratio did. So, I mean, I think you probably could make the argument that if that platform didn't launch, there would have just been something else that launched instead. And someone else would have taken advantage of it. But in general, I don't disagree with what you said. I mean, it did seem to divert attention away from what mattered to what really didn't.
I think the pump.fun moment, when pump.fun came along, crypto as a whole sort of graduated from occasionally sort of huffing on a weed vape to basically injecting fentanyl into its femoral artery. I think it was just like, it's just like we just did not need it. We did not need it. It was a cheap high. It got us really high, and now the come down is horrible. So yeah, I think Nick's got a good one there. It's like, yeah, maybe maybe if we could go back and undo pump.fun, that would be good for all of us.
We got one guy in the chat.
And so one more thing, the industry would have another 600 or 700 million or so liquidity that pump.fun wouldn't have sent out to the exchanges, right? Not to mention all the other people who've extracted money from the Solana ecosystem. Like estemates are about $3 to $6 billion worth of money that just came in and went straight out to go and fund yachts for people who ran the meme coins and possibly even the platform runners or owners.
Yeah, but it's hard convincing a lot of traders that was what was happening, right? Because it's their casino. They want to be able to try to go make money in their casino, but what's really happening is they're getting completely fleeced. And I would argue that a lot of the people that use those platforms would have never sold their Solana, but the fees and the other people taking these trades, those are people that would sell the Solana that they're receiving in exchange for that stuff. And I think that is kind of where people, sort of lost their way. We got Tom Crown in the chat. You guys should go subscribe to him if you haven't. He says that, have you seen this crazy chart? It's called Bitcoin dominance. Bitcoin dominance. This is truly like the longest cycle where Bitcoin dominance has gone up the longest. We haven't really seen this happen before. And it's not that surprising given where the state of the market is and the meme coin craze and all that stuff. It's not really that surprising, I guess, if you think about it. But we did have some questions in the chat, and let's see if we can go through a few of those. We got a question: what macro or crypto catalyst might result in a reversal? Either you guys have an opinion on that?
Ooh.
Macro, I mean, macro, I think is of what right now, basically, what's going on with the uncertainty in tariffs, like a resurgence in inflation potentially. That's something that seems to be a massive concern. Indeed, like inflation expectations, in terms of 10-year inflation expectations, are now at a 30-year high. And expectations, expectation is, perception is reality, in the sense that if consumers expect higher inflation, then, they're going to price things accordingly. And the tariffs aren't helping. Stagflation is one of them as well. There's growth concerns. So I think it's a lot of stuff on the macro side. On the crypto catalyst side, I don't know. North Korea hacking Coinbase Prime and stealing the US government's coins. I mean, it's very impractical, but they're very good.
Yeah. Do you? Are we talking a reversal, as in prices going lower again, or do you think we mean like a reversal in the trend?
I think it's somewhat open-ended. Like, I don't know exactly what they mean. Like, I guess if they're looking at a higher time frame, they're talking about a reversal to the downside. But if they're focused on what's just happened in the last couple of weeks, I guess they would be talking about a reversal back up to the upside. I don't really know what they're asking, but
I guess maybe sort of crypto regulations. I mean, there's talk of the big beautiful bill, isn't there, which isn't unique to crypto, but I guess some sort of something getting through Congress and getting approved that gives more clarity for the industry. I mean, we're still in an attention economy here. So even though meme coins are sort of seem to be on the slide, crypto itself still thrives on attention. So I kind of feel that maybe if Trump and the administration just kind of turn their beam back to crypto at some point, and Trump starts talking about it, it'd be enough for him to start talking about strategic reserves or whatever. That could be enough to re-inject some confidence.
Yeah.
Someone says, I noticed this recently. The 10-year and the 3-month recently inverted again. What are your thoughts? I'm like, oh, we get to go through this again. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, it's mostly just from the long end going down, because the short end hasn't really moved in the last.
Yeah, it's weeks. A bullish. What's it called? A bullish flattening, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely as a result of the long end going down, right? Like I said, mostly as a result of actions being taken, the lower deficit spending, the actions on the fiscal side. And then also, I've heard this theories in terms of like Besant's also trying to do some backdoor deals with the Chinese in terms of asking them to, trying to get them to buy more demand for US treasuries as well. Like, he's a market operator, like he's a hedge fund guy. So he's definitely doing some machinations in the back there to try and bring down the long end rates. So that's partly the reason why we're having this yield curve, the spread coming down.
Yeah. We got a few other questions on here. I'm curious what you guys think. Phil says, isn't what's happening, the negative sentiment, exactly what happens every time and what we kind of want to happen? I saw the fear and greed index was at 10.
10.
Yeah.
That's lower than FTX.
Yeah.
So I think that's lower than FTX, or about the same as FTX. Yeah.
Yeah. It is pretty low.
Yeah, and as people have pointed out, like these sorts of pullbacks, I think you've said this a few times on the show, Ben. Like, these sorts of pullbacks in bull markets are a par for the course. Like, this isn't necessarily unusual, but the sentiment around it certainly seems to be. So I think maybe what's happening perhaps happens every time, but the actual sentiment side of it is what is so strange. So I think what I would prefer to see at this current time is, okay, fine, prices are sliding, and there's maybe not such a catalyst on the immediate horizon that we can all get excited about. but I'd be a lot more confident that good times were around the corner if sentiment was holding up. And I think that's the thing that concerns me slightly, is that sentiment just does seem so bad, as the fear and greed index shows. And I don't think I don't remember that being quite this bad in previous cycles. And I think going back to meme coins, I think that's a big part of it. I think a lot of people, lost their shirt on meme coins, and that is contributing. Well, it's why, like Nick saying, pump.fun is something that he'd undo. I think that, that's maybe why.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. So I think that the sentiment on the altcoin side, especially as it relates to what we see when we scroll through crypto Twitter, especially the people, we've done polls and all this in the past in terms of most of the people that follow us on our channel. I don't know if you've done the same on yours, Ben, but most of them have more of their portfolio in altcoins, which is obviously impacting on things. I think, yeah, in terms of it, this is potentially something, if you were strategic, what's the cliche, you buy in the streets when there's blood, you buy when there's blood in the streets. I think that now this could be potentially an opportunity. Like if you want to get in on an asset which is potentially long-term valuable, you can do it just before you think there's a catalyst coming, which we've agreed that it's not really known right now if there is going to be a catalyst or what it's going to be, when it's going to come. Or you go in when the asset is very oversold and the market is panicking, and this seems like it could be a particular place right now with this fear and greed at 10. So I think it could be a potential opportunity. Of course, there are risks still, but I think that it's really, really the sentiment is not necessarily matching, and especially on the institutional side, like the institutional bullishness is another thing we've seen, and that doesn't match with the retail sentiment.
Someone says, either learn to take profits when up or turn into a Bitcoin maxi. Those are the only two good options.
It's true, man. And one of those is a lot simpler than the other.
Someone, does the increase in initial claims increase the chance of QT ending? I was thinking about the whole, because I don't remember which one of you guys talked about it, but Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, like cutting all these jobs, and how it's not really just that in general, it's almost antithetical to what Doge, the meme coin, is, right? If you're cutting all these spending and you're laying people off, like that, it kind of implies that the riskiest stuff up the risk curve, which are meme coins like Doge, would not do well. So it's kind of an interesting, it's almost like they're sort of antithetical to each other. But I'm curious, do you think that if the initial claims, continuing to increase, we just saw them come in today over 240, could that sort of lead to the end of quantitative tightening soon?
Yeah, obviously, but as we know, the Fed's got a dual mandate, right? And I guess the question is, which one are they more worried about, growth or inflation? And jobs as well. I think that it's not just the initial claims on the employment side. There's also the growth side. There's the consumer confidence numbers, which were low. We had the ISM numbers as well 2 weeks ago, which were low. So there is the growth component, which they would be worried about. But then again, like I mentioned a few moments ago, you have inflation expectations at a 30-year high. So it's like, okay, the Fed is trying to do a very fine balancing act here. So all else being equal, ceteris paribus, yeah, you'd obviously expect so, but it's not operating in a vacuum. They have to worry about inflation as well.
Someone says, they're sort of quoting, tariffs are killing crypto. How are there tariffs on, again, I don't know what they're meaning, but I think they're talking about altcoins. It reminds me, I think I mentioned this last week, or no, 2 weeks ago, where someone was laughing when Trump announced tariffs for the first time on like Mexico and or Canada, and Ethereum dumped, and then someone sort of tweeted out, I guess Ethereum's made of aluminum or something.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. What's your take on this? Like, is it, why are tariffs necessarily bearish for crypto? Is it because it leads to more inflation? Like, is it just uncertainty? What do you think? Like, why does that have an effect?
You can go first, go.
I would lean more towards the uncertainty. And as Nick said, inflation. Yeah, I think people are worried about inflation, and these inflation expectations are so high at the moment. But yeah, I think what it's sowing is uncertainty, and I think you've got bigger players in the market. You've got people who are there in cash and who are sort of ready to invest. But I get the feeling everyone's just sort of stepping back and going, let's just see what happens here. Because he announces tariffs one day and then he postpones them a couple of days later, and now they're back on, and now it's an extra 10% on China, and now it's the EU as well, and it's like, well, what is it? What is it going to be? And it goes back to my comment earlier. I think actually what could be the more damaging aspect of tariffs is all the uncertainty they cause, rather than perhaps the tariffs themselves. Because as I think a few people have pointed out, like actually a lot of countries already have tariffs on the US, which in some cases I believe are higher than the ones that the US is sort of proposing itself. So, perhaps once these things come into effect, then we'll see a sort of settling down. But at the moment, like, who can tell? No one knows what Trump will come out with tomorrow. Who's next in line for tariffs?
We don't know.
Tariff, we had a 10% announcement of 10% of tariffs on China just before the stream started. Did you hear this? Another 10% of tariffs on China. So it's increased there. I guess this comes back to the question, the underlying question of what sort of an asset class is, or what classification of asset would crypto and Bitcoin be? Is it a risk on or a risk off? Gold has been trading very well over the past few months because it's been generally considered the risk off asset, inflation hedge, all this kind of stuff. And Bitcoin's correlation with, equity has been rising generally, right? And it's placed in the same bucket for most institutional investors, at least, is like, this is our risk on, risk on kind of asset. And it's obviously got a high beta to the rest of the S&P. It's one of these things that it's going to sell off when risk assets are selling off. And generally, it's unfortunate as well sometimes, because Trump announces his tariffs usually on a Friday. And crypto is the only market that's operating 24/7 apart from futures. So generally, this is the kind of thing that will sell off, or risk on asset that will sell off over the weekend. And so it's unfortunate, the idiosyncrasy of crypto. But I think it's just the fact that it's uncertainty. It's obviously damaging for worries about it having the growth of the economies, but then also the crypto's relation to it in terms of being a risk on asset.
Someone says, can I hear the most bullish and bearish opinion on Bitcoin?
Well, that's a wide spectrum.
Yeah. I guess the
Satoshi comes out tomorrow. That's the most bearish example.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely tough. I think a lot of people are hoping that we just get a normal cycle, like a right translated cycle. But obviously it might not be. It might be something different. And I don't know that anyone actually has the answer to that question at this point. But we'll see. I'm kind of the opinion that is, because in the 2017 cycle, there is a time where Bitcoin dropped to the high from 2016, and then it still continued. And so you could argue that Bitcoin could go as low as the 2024 high and still be sort of mimicking 2017. But I think if it goes below the 2024 high, that would become probably more problematic. It'd become more problematic in terms of the structure of the cycle. Like if you were to go back into like the 60s or something, then it starts to look more like the QQQ launch. Because and that was something we had talked about before as well. So I think it kind of depends on where Bitcoin finds support here. We basically just been watching a drop since January 20th, and we'll see. I also think too, if you look at the S&P 500, the S&P also is generally weak between February options expiration and March options expiration in post-election years. So like right now. And so I also think that there's just general weakness in the market at this time in the cycle. In fact, did you guys know that the entire pandemic crash occurred between February options expiration and March options expiration in 2020? Like the entire crash was between those two dates. So it could just be that. It could be that. I don't know. Because like one of the questions earlier was, could stock market, going down affect Bitcoin? And I think that's to some degree what's happening, right? The stock market is struggling recently. It's down from like 60 over 6,100. The S&P is now at 5,900. It's normally weak, and I don't know exactly why. I mean, is it taxes? What is it? But normally it's weak around February to March in post-election years. Anyways, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We're at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. Nick, thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Guy, thanks for being here again. Guys, if you want to follow we have the Coin Bureau channel in the YouTube channel down in the comment or the information below. If you want to follow Nick on Twitter, his link is also in the description below as well. So make sure you guys do that. Next week we will be on Rob's channel, I believe, unless he's still out, but I don't think he's going to be out next week. So we'll probably be on Rob's channel, and we will see you guys next time.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for being on.
See you, everyone.